GDPR explained. Topics to be covered. In this second module, we will cover the following topics. The history of GDPR. What are the key changes to the law? What are the basic requirements of the law? The structure of GDPR. Summary. Assessment. The history of GDPR. The General Data Protection Regulation was implemented on 25th of May 2018, replacing the existing 1995 Data Protection Directive. It also takes the place of the UK Data Protection Act, 1998. Principles regarding protecting personal data and privacy remain the same. However, with modern technology, we create more personal data than ever. Social media and cloud storage was unheard of, and in 1995 only 1% of the EU population was using the Internet. The 1995 Data Protection Directive and the Data Protection Act, 1998, left many areas open to interpretation, and in an ever-changing world, an update became necessary. On the 14th of April 2016, the GDPR was approved after 4 years of discussions. With it changing from a directive to a regulation, it became immediately enforceable by law in all EU member states. What are the key changes to the law? We are now going to look at the changes that were brought forward by the update in regulations. The key changes to the law include: cost of fines. A company may be fined up to €20 million or 4% of its global turnover for not complying with EU regulations. Expanding into broader reach the impact on an organization regardless of where they are based geographically, as we now do much more business online. A single supervisory authority. Each organization is supervised in its own country. The supervisor will monitor the organizations worldwide. The UK supervisor is the Information Commissioner's Office, ICO. Breaching personal data. Where there is a breach in the security of data which could lead to the accidental or unlawful loss, destruction, unauthorized disclosure of or allowing someone who is not authorized to gain access to personal data. Individual consent. Any consent given by an individual must be absolutely clear. When consent is withdrawn, or an objection is raised, the individual has the right to have their data erased. This is called the right to be forgotten. Data may be retained if there is a regulatory obligation to do so. What are the basic requirements of the law? We are now going to look at the key requirements of the General Data Protection Regulation compliance. These requirements are: lawful, fair and transparent processing. Data processing must be for a legitimate purpose. The companies must also inform data subjects how their personal data is being used. Limitation of purpose, data and storage. Data must be limited in its processing by only processing it for its required purpose. Only the data that is required should be collected, and must not be kept once the processing purpose is completed. Data subject rights. Data subjects have the right to know what information a company has about them and what they do with it. They also have the right to request a company to amend incorrect information or even erase their data. Consent. Clear and explicit consent must be given when the data processed is being used for reasons other than its legitimate purpose. Where the data subject is less than 16 years of age, consent of the parent or guardian is required. Personal data breaches. Organizations must keep a personal data breach register and depend on the level of the data breach. The regulator and the data subject must be informed of this breach within 72 hours. Privacy by design. Organizations must implement measures to ensure personal data is protected in the design of new systems and procedures. Data protection impact assessment. Data protection assessments must be made when implementing a new system or starting a new project. It is a necessary procedure when there is a significant change in the way data is processed. Data transfers. Data controllers have the responsibility to ensure the protection of personal data when it is being transferred outside the company or a third party. They also have to ensure that GDPR requirements are respected. Data Protection Officer. An organization should assign a data protection officer where significant data processing is taking place. The data protection officer will have the responsibility for ensuring the company complies with the GDPR requirements. Awareness and training. Organizations must make their employees aware of GDPR requirements. Regular training must be provided to ensure employees are aware of their responsibilities in protecting personal data and in identifying data breaches as soon as possible. The structure of GDPR. The GDPR is a very large piece of legislation. Therefore, its structure has been broken down into 11 chapters. These chapters cover general provisions, principles, rights of the data subject, duties of data controllers or processors, transfers of personal data to third countries, supervisory authorities, cooperation among member states, remedies, liability or penalties for breach of rights, miscellaneous final provisions. Articles. Each chapter is split into articles. There are 99 articles in the GDPR. We are now going to take a look at the key articles. These are: Article 6, Lawfulness of processing. Processing is only lawful if at least one of the following applies. The data subject has given consent. It is necessary for compliance with a legal obligation if it protects the interests of the data subject or for the purpose of legitimate interests. Article 15, Right of access by the data subject. The data subject has the right to obtain information about them from a data controller, and whether or not it's being processed. Article 16, Right to rectification. The data subject has the right to obtain from the data controller without delay the rectification of inaccurate personal data concerning them. Also, the data subject shall have the right to have incomplete personal data completed. Article 18, Right to restriction of processing. The data subject has the right to obtain data from the data controller. The restriction of processing where one of the following applies. The data subject contests the accuracy of information when processing of data is unlawful, and the data subject asks for it to be deleted, or where the data is no longer needed for processing but is retained in the event it is needed in a legal situation. Article 20, Right to data portability. The data subject has the right to receive the personal data concerning them, which they have provided to a data controller, in a commonly used format and have the right to pass that data to another data controller without delay from the data controller to which the personal data had been provided. Article 21, Right to object. The data subject has the right to object to the processing of their personal data. To continue processing data, the controller must demonstrate compelling legitimate grounds for processing the data. Organizational structure. We will now look at the structure of the GDPR and how it works. We begin with the European Data Protection Board, and they will issue guidance to data controllers and processors. The lead supervisory authority, Information Commissioner's Office, will oversee both the data processors and controllers ensure compliance. The lead authority will enforce data protection impact statements to the data controller and processor. The data controllers and processors will notify the supervisory authority of any breaches or notifications. The data controller will then pass the data that is processed on to third countries, third parties and others who require this information. At the heart of the GDPR is the protection of personally identifiable information. Summary. In this module, we have looked at the GDPR in much more detail. We now know why the regulation came into force, and we have learnt. One of the key changes made by the GDPR is much larger fines for companies who do not follow the legislation. GDPR ensures that consent is given clearly and that at any time, an individual has the right to have their data destroyed. The UK Supervisory Authority for implementing the GDPR is the Information Commissioner's Office, ICO. Authorities may liaise with data protection officers where companies implement them.